Age of Calamity is often phrased as the love letter to Breath of the Wild, and has been more known to fans than the first Hyrule Warriors game, not to mention outselling every Warriors game to date. While it may seem like your typical Musou hack and slash game at first glance, there's more than just the 1 versus 1000 combat in this game. Welcome to Play It by Tier, a new series created by the Switch Clicks. In this series, we will be reviewing a variety of games, movies, and other media, and we will be placing each of these onto a tier list based on a category. In this first episode, we will be reviewing Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity for the Nintendo Switch. There will be spoilers in this review, so if you wish to not have the story of this game spoiled to you, please do not watch this video. Unlike the first Hyrule Warriors game, which is seen as a celebration of the Legend of Zelda franchise, Age of Calamity is seen as a serious Zelda game with its direct connection to Breath of the Wild, and its development involving much more influence and supervision from Nintendo. This game paid more attention to the story rather than gameplay, quite contrary to what people would believe, considering Breath of the Wild had a somewhat empty story. Being the first narrative-focused Warriors game, this also holds great improvements from the first game's story, not to mention the Warriors franchise as a whole. One of the biggest things that come to mind when talking about this game's story is that this game is not a prequel, but rather a pseudo-prequel, or a half-sequel, all because the Egg Guardian, aka Terrako, traveled back in time from the original Breath of the Wild timeline, creating the timeline split that divided the fanbase. At first glance, the story is basically just a what-if scenario, or an alternate universe fanfiction that has come to life. While this is accurate, I'm willing to throw in that this game fixes all the story issues within Breath of the Wild, with the first and most obvious point being that Age of Calamity has almost 1 hour more cutscenes than Breath of the Wild. Age of Calamity not only has a total cutscene runtime of a feature-length film, but it also has a lot more depth added into each cutscene. Much of these cutscenes gave us more character development for most characters, and allowed us to actually connect with these characters, whereas in Breath of the Wild, we rarely interact with most of these characters and move on to the next. Even the antagonists Koga and Suga, Aster and Ganon, were given a lot more attention through cutscenes outside of the perspective of Link, which was what we generally saw in Breath of the Wild aside from Zelda. The story itself doesn't just give us more as a whole, it also parallels a lot of Breath of the Wild's backstory and even mirrors the cutscenes, giving us essentially the opposite of what we already know. Rather than being steady friends getting together at Hyrule Castle's gazebo, the champions were good friends already. Instead of the loss of the champions, we see the survival of the champions. Where the Battle of Akala Citadel was lost in Breath of the Wild, it was won in Age of Calamity. Link did not have to be placed in the Shrine of Resurrection, and King Rome was alive and well at the Temple of Time. Many of these parallels, no matter how subtle, show us more than a what-if scenario. It gives Age of Calamity a purpose of being a completely opposite yet similar game to Breath of the Wild. And Breath of the Wild was often criticized for having a small and lackluster soundtrack, although much of its soundtrack was composed intentionally to match the intended vibes of the game, especially with its calm and peaceful atmosphere. Despite all that, I found there to be a number of very good themes, whether it's a reference to a familiar theme like the Song of Time, or simply a powerful theme like the main theme of Breath of the Wild. Take all that, make it 10 times more insane, and throw in some new and original pieces. This is what Age of Calamity has for a soundtrack. Evolved versions of familiar themes featuring new parts to a theme or a more dramatic and emotional variation of our favorite themes. Of course, the game does have its fair share of reused themes from Breath of the Wild, such as the themes for each of the 4 champions, but the new recomposed themes fit in so well that you wouldn't easily tell the difference between Breath of the Wild themes and Age of Calamity themes, without knowing that they are done by different composers for each game. In terms of how the game looks, its art style stays completely faithful to Breath of the Wild, boasting the colorful, cel-shaded look that I sometimes refer to as the definitive Zelda art style. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't some differences. Most of the differences within the game lie during gameplay, and are usually because of hardware limitations. Still, these differences are barely noticeable enough for you to think that you're playing Breath of the Wild when watching a cutscene. The base gameplay is essentially your typical Warriors game, with a variety of weapons, characters, and RPG elements such as leveling up. But what makes this one unique is that the game tried to get as close to Breath of the Wild as possible, by featuring stuff like Sheikah Slate runes, the paraglider, flurry rush, and elemental rods, just to name a few. While the variety of weapons is a bit lacking, with most characters sporting at least 1 or 2 weapons of the same type, The entire roster itself blew my mind. The roster is much larger than what Nintendo had showcased, featuring a larger number of characters we did not expect to come. The 4 champion descendants from Breath of the Wild all make major appearances, alongside the Great Fairies and Monk Maz Koshia. Even the most unexpected characters made the cut. Master Koga, King Rome, the Egg Guardian, and even Calamity Ganon. Contrary to what I expected, Age of Calamity feels like a smaller game than Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. However, I believe that Age of Calamity still has enough content to fill you in for a decent amount of time, whereas the first game would take a ludicrous amount of time to play through, especially when it comes to being a completionist, where it can roughly take 200 to 250 hours to max out every character and level and get 100%. It would likely take 4 times that in Definitive Edition, despite going through similar processes such as playing through side quests or playing through a giant level. It definitely features a lot less than the first Hyrule Warriors game, but all the features of the first game have been greatly improved on. Character and boost selections have been moved to the mission preview on the level select, which makes it much easier to prepare for the level you want to play. Weapon upgrades have been simplified so you don't have to meet a certain kill quota to unlock a skill, or gain overpowered skills to compile them into one weapon. The badge tree has been changed to a side quest based system, where you would simply have to pick whatever side quest on the map and complete it, rather than navigating a whole tree of unlockable badges. The badge system itself has also been simplified, focusing mostly on the weapons rather than the health or the other stats of a character. Before and after launch, there have been numerous complaints about the frame rate dropping down to the point where the game is virtually unplayable, despite looking pretty okay at first glance. In my personal experience, there have been only a few instances in single player where the game was laggy, to the point where I would deem it unplayable, whether it was caused by too much activity on the screen or simply too many assets trying to render. Thankfully, these occurrences are in very specific conditions, not to mention they don't happen within the main levels. As far as multiplayer goes, I do have to say that it could definitely use a bigger improvement. The resolution does take a big hit, and the game does appear to be blurry and sometimes very laggy, especially when you're playing in handheld mode. That's probably the reason why there is no online multiplayer. Much like the first game's multiplayer, the only real advantage the player would have is more reliable multitasking, because your CPU allies usually aren't strong enough to clear outposts or kill big enemies in a short amount of time. Other than that, there hasn't been any great significance or incentive to play multiplayer. Age of Calamity was essentially a test for Koei Tecmo to fix the issues or complaints from Definitive Edition, and I'd say they got about 3/4 of the way through, forgetting to fine-tune the frame rate or the resolution. Controls definitely come to mind, lacking the option for preference-based controls. It is very inconsistent with the first game, using Y to attack rather than B, among many other control changes. But I believe that most of the other issues have been resolved, especially when it comes to being a completionist in the game. The final ranking for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is a B. In conclusion, the story of this game doesn't appeal to everyone, but it holds a huge appeal towards those who understand Breath of the Wild's lore. It does a great job at storytelling, being able to accomplish what Breath of the Wild failed to do. The music and aesthetics hold very true to Breath of the Wild, giving off an endless blast of nostalgia, familiarity, and emotion. The gameplay is playable and great as a transition to the Warriors franchise, but it does not hold up too well in performance and might be a barrier for those transitioning from other Warriors games, especially the first Hyrule Warriors game.